as well. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and get started. So thank you everybody so much for taking the time to attend. I know, we're 3 years past the start of the pandemic, 4 years almost, and everybody's, tired of webinars, but I appreciate you showing up to learn, right? Because that's what we're here to do. We're here to learn. We're here to try to understand. And in this case, we're trying to learn more about the Salesforce community breaches and the whole idea of Salesforce community security and what you can do to make sure that your Experience Cloud sites, your Salesforce communities, are secure. And so what I wanted to do is to break down a little bit the story of the very newsworthy breach that hit last spring 2023, that hit the news spring 2023, but that actually, as you'll see, had its roots much earlier and was in many respects, just waiting to happen. So a few housekeeping notes. First of all, attendee mics are going to be muted, but there is a Q&A panel. I will try to get to all of the questions, or as many questions as possible. The session is going to be recorded and it'll be shared on the AutoRABIT website. And then, I'll answer the questions at the end. Otherwise, I've got a lot of screens open, so can't really juggle them in real time here. So our speaker today is me. I'm Andrew Davis. I'm the Chief Product Officer at AutoRABIT. And somehow I've found myself focused on this space of DevSecOps for Salesforce for the last 10 years. I'm author of the book Mastering Salesforce DevOps. And there just seems to be a lot that we need to look at in this space. So what I wanted to do in this webinar today is, first of all, just give an overview of the situation, help everybody to understand the context that we're speaking from. And then I wanted to do a deep dive into the shared responsibility model. So critically important, if you're doing anything at all on the Salesforce platform, even if you're a user of the platform, let alone an admin developer, you need to understand about the shared responsibility model. And then you need to understand the breach that was reported, publicized back in the spring. And then you need to understand what you can do today. What are the protective steps you can take today to make sure you're not in the news next time? So overview of the situation. So first of all, in April, a couple of years ago, in April, 1 year ago, April 2023, depending on when you're listening to the recording, there was news that originally broke on a site called Krebs on Security. A security researcher named Brian Krebs broke the news that there were over 200 Salesforce community sites that had been determined to be leaking data, and undoubtedly a whole lot more. And some of these had been vulnerable for multiple years, and that there were successful demonstrated exploits available of that. And so if we look at the original report from April 27th, this is the Krebs report. This broke on his site, but then it cascaded out with quite a lot of news stories around different places. And one of the central topics in here was that a number of sites, such as the state of Vermont, had created a pandemic unemployment assistance program with a form that allowed people to submit their name, their social security number, their date of birth, and so forth to the state of Vermont to say, hey, I'm eligible for benefits under the Pandemic Unemployment Assistance Program. Now, on the back end, this looks like any other website, but this was actually a Salesforce site, Salesforce Experience Cloud site, one of those 220 that were found to be leaking data. And so what was happening is somebody on the public internet would fill in this form, put in their data, and it would go into a Salesforce database. List of contacts, for example, and the contacts would have social security number, date of birth, and so forth. Now, obviously, this form has to be accessible to the public internet. So someone like myself can come in and write data into Salesforce. I could come into I'm sure they've tightened it down now, but I could come into this site, I could type in my information, and I'm actually writing data into the Salesforce database, which is kind of cool, kind of practical, useful. Now, here's the problem. They determined that it was possible to read information out of that database too, not just the information of the person who had submitted this, but the information of anyone who had submitted this in this Vermont Pandemic Unemployment Assistance Program. And so Vermont's CISO has this very gentle comment. My team is frustrated by the permissive nature of the platform. That's a very well-framed comment. I strongly suspect that that is not the way he phrased his concerns when the news first broke in private. I suspect that he probably had some much more choice words to say at the time. So this was a simple mistake related to the permissions that are given in Salesforce, but it had huge consequences. And so if you think about this, there are 200 sites, including State of Vermont, a bank, TCF Bank, Washington, D.C. Health, and so forth, but potentially many, many, many other sites, including any Experience Cloud sites that you might be hosting, were or could be accessible as well. And so when you think about what's at stake, you've got compliance concerns, you've got loss of consumer trust. It could be and these days it can actually be construed as an SEC securities violation. If you find out that you've been hacked, you have to alert the SEC, and we'll come back to that a minute later. I just want to come back to this one slide that says, a simple mistake with huge consequences. Now, hopefully, probably most of the people on here are familiar with the Salesforce security model, but maybe some people are only partially familiar with the Salesforce security model and the way that profiles interact with permission sets, interact with things like sharing rules and sharing sets and manual sharing and so forth, the object level security, the field level security, the row level access, these kinds of things, and how that is inherited. It's quite a complicated challenge. I know I took a Salesforce Data Architect certification many years ago. I spent a while studying. I spent a while just trying to make sense of it all, right? It's complicated. Everybody knows it's complicated. And generally, the dynamic when you're building in Salesforce is you're in a rush. I mean, even when it's not the pandemic, right? You're still in a rush. And you're trying to get things right, but on a very short timeline. And so mostly the focus is just getting it to work for the users. One of the most common issues that you have when you do a deployment is you do the deployment, but you forget to deploy the permissions. And so you've deployed the page to the next environment, but the users can't see it. Every time, right? So you deploy the permissions, and it's such a struggle for admins and developers just to get the permissions open enough for people to actually see the sites, see the pages or the site or whatever it is you're trying to make accessible. But think about that dynamic, right? You have to work hard to make things accessible enough for people to see it. But then there's the risk if you're oversharing, then there's a huge risk there. So we're really looking for this very narrow window where it's just enough for people to do everything that they need to do, but not too much, so that you're sharing more information than you need inside the company, and certainly that you're not sharing more information than you need outside the company. So just looking at the response timeline. So the vulnerability related to this was first posted in October 2020. And so there's a guy named Aaron Costello. And Aaron Costello posted this, an in-depth look at exploitation vectors for the everyday community, October 9th, 2020, right? And he talks about Salesforce Lightning, how do they do security, the recon process, how do you look around and try to find Salesforce sites out there, and then the exploitation process. So he published this. Now, this is not uncommon in the security world. There is an idea of security by obscurity, which means security by not telling people all of the ways that information might be hacked or accessed. Security by obscurity is no security at all, because you can never hide this information forever, and it actually makes it more valuable if there's only a small number of people who have this information. It actually becomes much more valuable to publicize security exploits so that people can build tooling to protect against that, lock things down, and so forth. But there's a big but there. It does depend upon people actually responding to that and locking their sites down based on that information. So this was posted in 2020. And Salesforce, maybe was working on some things behind the scenes over the next 3 years and so forth. But basically, that was out there for 3 years or 2.5 years. And then when the news hit, everybody's like, oh no, but this was known for at least 2.5 years prior to that, right? Now, Salesforce on the back end, they're trying to roll out security protections. They're trying to protect all their customers. They work hard at that. But they're in a very, very difficult position because there's some security restrictions. The best way to secure an Experience Cloud site is to take it offline, right? To lock it down so that you can't reveal anything. But what people want to reveal in these Experience Cloud sites is quite varied. Maybe I'm in a company where I want people to see my full product catalog. And so I want the product object to be read-only visible through Experience Cloud on the public internet. But for another company, that constitutes a breach, a data breach. They do not want that catalog. How is Salesforce supposed to know? Are you a customer who meant to have your products read-only for the whole world, for the guest user access? Or are you not a company that wanted your products to all be read-only for the guest user profile? Big deal. The prices, your price book, right? All of this data that's in your Salesforce org. So Salesforce can't just go locking everything down indiscriminately because that might not be what you want. They might break your existing customizations. And so what that means is it's leading to this long window where it is actually your responsibility as somebody who's building on Salesforce or running a Salesforce org or someone running a company who's got Salesforce. It's your responsibility. And that brings us to the shared responsibility model. Hopefully, I'm assuming you all know about trust.salesforce.com, trust.salesforce.com. It's this Salesforce Trust site. It's a great resource, got a lot of information. It's the uptime information on Salesforce. It's got this well-architected guide that you can see here in the upper left. It's got a big section on security, including guidelines for how to secure your Salesforce sites and so forth. But I'm going to guess that if you are listening to this webinar and you've actually spent a lot of time reading the security material on that site, I'm going to guess you're unusual, that maybe you're in a company where, regulated industry or something where security is really important. You've got a manager, leader, team leader that's really emphasized the importance of security. The vast majority of people who are building on Salesforce have never even seen that site. Now, you'll find on that site quotes like this one, Parker Harris, saying, "Nothing is more important to our company than the privacy of our customers' data." And he had to say that 25 years ago, 1998, when he was trying to convince people that they should move their business into the cloud. Now, Salesforce was a trailblazer in moving people onto the cloud. Nobody trusted their company's data on the public internet in 1998, or no wise CIO would. It took a long time for the world to build enough trust in the public internet to move to sites like Salesforce. But there's a really, really, really important caveat here that we need to understand. If you go to that trust.salesforce.com site, you'll find there's a white paper on Salesforce security. You can download that Salesforce security white paper. It's got Astro in there. It's got Cody. It's got the Trailblazer forest. It's got all the beautiful imagery. And it's got all this information. I forget how long it was, maybe 30 pages, 40-page guide. All this information, all the things that Salesforce does to secure your site. It's got 1,000 full-time employees that are in the security team. It's got MFA. It's got very rich security controls, doing all these things on the back end to monitor for attacks and so forth. And you get down to the very, 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 very end of that document, basically the last page. And there's a section called Salesforce Partners with Customers. And I've clipped that out of here. So when you become I'm going to read this. I know you can read, but just for dramatic effect. When you become a Salesforce customer, you gain a trusted digital advisor and partner in protecting your data. As part of our commitment to safeguarding customers' data, Salesforce does the following 3 things. They provide the infrastructure, their job. They provide a secure infrastructure. Second, they enable customers. They enable customers to operate their Salesforce environment securely. Now, they don't force customers to operate their Salesforce environment securely. What they do is they enable them by providing tools technologies, professional services, sales engineering, and so forth. And then they educate customers on the need and options for enhanced security features. Now, if during the course of this webinar, you're getting a little bit more educated than you were, great, fantastic, I've done my job. But then you need to understand that well, Salesforce was supposed to be educating you, right, on these security features, but maybe, maybe you missed some of this education. And you're not alone. There are, Salesforce brags about having 6 million developers building on their platform. 6 million. I don't think the number is quite that high in reality, but hundreds of thousands of people building full-time on Salesforce. The vast majority of them know almost nothing about how to build securely. Now, look at this. Those are Salesforce's 3 jobs. Now, your 3 jobs, customers' 3 jobs, these 3 things: monitor user behaviors and event logs in their environment. Monitor user behaviors. Now, if you're a Salesforce admin or a developer or an architect or a manager managing a team of these people, typically you're working full-time. You're working flat out, just trying to build the things you're being asked to build, address bugs, manage the roadmap for next features, look at all the new fancy Salesforce features and so forth. Do you have time to monitor user behaviors? Do you have time to monitor event logs? Not unless you've got some really good tooling monitoring that for you and really bringing to your attention things that you really need to care about. It's very, very hard to monitor user behaviors and event logs because there's so much noise, infinite amount of noise, to find the signal, to find the real information you need. That's the first one. Second one, protect. It's your responsibility to protect sensitive customer data in alignment with compliance standards. And third, to adopt the latest available security controls and features such as single sign-on and MFA. Their job is to make these security controls available. Your job is to adopt them. Now, this is what we call the shared security model. It is actually, or the shared responsibility model. It's actually a lot of responsibilities in this lower quadrant, right? So we think about this, the Salesforce platform, including all of the great education that they do and so forth. But then on that, you build your data model, this schema, right? Just massive amounts of data on there. On that, you build your logic, flows upon flows upon flows and triggers and all the things, right? And then on top of that, you build your user interface. That's a lot of complex configuration, sophistication. Salesforce has a very reliable, very secure, trusted platform. That's the bottom thing. They've got 1,000 full-time engineers, full-time security specialists monitoring it. And that's where their Salesforce trust boundary ends. They've done their job. That's what we call shared responsibility. The rest, that's up to you and your team. Now, that is what I would call risky. Typically, there is typically an enormous amount of risk. The risk of misconfigurations are massive. The risk of misconfiguration is as big as the size of your configuration. The more configuration you have, the more risk you have. The more code you have, the more risk you have, right? Shared responsibility, that's your responsibility, but it's so much responsibility. And typically, most of these teams are pretty small. How many full-time security experts do you have on your Salesforce team? How many half-time security experts do you have on your Salesforce team? How many quarter-time security experts do you have? Do you have anybody? Do you have anybody who has any idea? Hopefully everybody has some idea, but as you can see, there's a lot of risk, right? And so the amount of stuff that we're building on Salesforce, I think of it as like cities. We're building cities in the cloud, massive amounts of customization, configuration. The question then is, who's securing this city? That you're responsible for your data. Integrations, customizations, third-party apps, and so forth, these things all require attention. And so you need automated scanners and so forth. So we've got some time here still. So I wanted to go in to help everybody to understand the breach. I showed this website already. I showed this site already. And I did want to point out that there is, some of these sites were created during the urgent rush of the COVID pandemic. One of the groups affected was DC Health. I happen to know that team personally. They're wonderful, good-hearted people, hardworking, doing their best to respond to the pandemic and so forth. It's understandable, right? If you're in a rush, sometimes you miss things. Okay, fair enough. The pandemic's over. but has the urgency stopped, right? Are your teams not still in a rush? As far as like my experience, almost every Salesforce team, almost every team in any industry, they're in a rush. Everybody's rushing. Everybody's, trying to move as fast as they can. And because we move as fast as we can, we often cause ourselves more rework. So there's certainly the risk that we are, yeah, still at risk. So what I wanted to do is I had the chance to actually take some time. I'm not an expert in security tools and so forth. It's not, I'm sort of a peacetime Salesforce builder, but all of us need to get equipped with the basic education. And I've done a fair amount of security training on top of this. So I wanted to walk through, basically, these are the instructions that are given in this exploitation tool. So explain how this is done. And I will also share that there is, that the same guy, Aaron Costello, he also gave an explanation of how to protect. A couple months later, he gave an explanation of how to protect your Salesforce site. And so we'll share the link to that as well. You can also find other videos. Matt Myers, CTA, did a really, really nice video describing how to do this analysis. And so what the exploitation involved is downloading a tool called Burp Suite. Burp Suite, catchy name, obviously big marketing budget. I found that name. You can download the Burp Suite Community Edition for free. And so I have done that. And I'm going to open up my Burp Suite Community Edition here. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to walk you through, even with my very basic usage knowledge of this tool, I was able to do an analysis, follow that tutorial. And I had a call with our head of AutoRABIT community site just to make sure that we were protecting ourselves. So what we're going to do here inside Burp Suite, we're going to go to this section called Target, and we're going to open a browser. And what this does is this is actually going to open a Chromium browser, basically the equivalent of Chrome, an open source version of Chrome. I think it's just opening. It's not the fastest, but so I'm opening the browser, opens up to the website for this company that that offers this product. And I'm going to go to AutoRABIT's Learning Hub. Now, AutoRABIT's Learning Hub is a great place to go to learn about security and securing your Salesforce sites. So I'm going to go to it as a place for me to learn about how to hack a Salesforce site. According to Salesforce's policies, you're now, as of last year, allowed to run port scans and these kinds of things against your Salesforce site. They changed their policy in January of 2023, but you have to do it against your own site. You have to do it over the weekend. We're close enough to the weekend. I'm not going to do anything anything fancy here. And if you discover any vulnerabilities, you've got to alert Salesforce. So there's a bunch of other rules. So you need to read those if you really wanted to go about it. So Learning Hub is a fantastic place that AutoRABIT makes available to ask questions. As you can see here, take your first steps with AutoRABIT. We've got all of the documentation for our products, and then create and view support tickets. Now, this is this webinar here that I'm doing here. We've got another one that I did with an amazing guy named Josh Corman a month or so ago. Upcoming events like our DevHops conference and so forth. So lots of these are live interactive learning sessions, but I'm going to learn in a very different way. What Burp Suite has done is Burp Suite has been monitoring all of the network traffic that I've been sending to this AutoRABIT Learning Hub, and all of the network traffic I've been getting back from that. And so you can see it's like the networks tab. In fact, this looks exactly like or very much like the Chrome dev tools here. So I'm going to come down, and you see we're communicating back and forth to this URL that is learninghub.autorabbit.com/s/sfsites/aura. So most of you are probably aware, Aura is the predecessor to Lightning Web Components, formerly known as Salesforce Lightning, and Experience Cloud sites are built generally in some combination of Aura components and Lightning Web components. And so this the URL endpoint what this is showing is that there's actually many, many, many messages being sent back and forth from my browser to the website to compose it. So for example, every image that you see on here is a separate request, all of the text and so forth. And that's the way modern websites work. And so sometimes this is described as a microservices architecture, that we're actually sending a lot of different REST API calls to the Salesforce backend. Now, what that means is that Salesforce needs to make available a lot of different information, and then in the browser, that's all compiled into one coherent website. And the Mark Meyer, whose demonstration video I showed earlier, he made the point that even if you have not enabled API access on your Salesforce site, if you have Experience Cloud, of course, there's still API communication happening. You're still hitting these APIs. So I'm going to go to one of these post requests. And this is all the details. For most people, it looks like gibberish. And I'm going to do something here that's send to repeater. And so this is a capability in Burp Suite that basically allows me to take that same request and just send that request in isolation. So I'm sending one single API call. So I sent the request, and hopefully you guys can see it. I'll make my screen a little bit bigger here in case, I don't know what your resolution's like, but maybe I can't. Okay, anyway, hopefully the resolution's big enough. But I got a 200 response here, and I got a success message here. So that indicates that I was successfully able to send this message over to Salesforce. Now, what I'm getting back here is an interesting amount of information. This is a lot of back-end information about that Salesforce site and the Salesforce Community site. One of the things you're seeing here is, for example, the 3-character prefix, Salesforce ID prefix. And you'll see very famous, well-known objects like user object, prefix 005, right? You'll see account on here, contact, and so forth. So we're actually getting information about the Salesforce org already. Now, but what I'm going to do is I'm going to move this around a little bit. And I've got some notes for myself. Open Burp Suite, got my target, decode an Oracle. Now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to actually change the messages. So what I see here in Burp Suite, if I go to this message body, I double click this, and you see it's actually decoding it here. And this, what looks like gibberish here, I'm going to copy that. I'm going to move it into VS Code here. And I've got a utility here that is, I want to URL decode this. And I've there's a thing called URL encoding, decoding. Anyway, this is decoded. And then I'm going to format it. And you can actually see, oh, look, it's JSON. Looks like JavaScript data. And in here, you can see that this is the particular API call that was being sent. It's something about get navigation menu. And so somehow I was sending an API call over here that reveals the navigation menu. I'll probably find information in the response about that matches the navigation. So what I want to do now is to demonstrate that you can send other commands. I've copied these out of the article. This one in particular is called get config data. So I want to send this command get config data. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to replace that JSON here. So this is what I'm going to send, a very simple call to get config data. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to copy that over here, going to remove some of the new lines, and I'm going to encode it. I'm going to copy that, and I've turned it back into gibberish. And I'm going to replace this message here, and I'm going to send the message, and voila, 200 success. And the success was getting config data. So I got a bunch of data again on the objects, including also which sites are considered trusted sites, some non-navigable data, non-navigable entities, and so forth. A bit of more information, starting to get interesting. So then one thing you can do is you can then send requests to get different bits of data here. So I'm going to replace this. I need to see this. So I'm actually now going to send this request to get items and get a bunch of items from this. Now I can get any object that I want. I can get contacts, cases. Now, I'm not saying you're gonna get them, but you can try to get them. Now, one thing here that I noticed is that I ran this on our site for the user object because I was curious to see if we can get the user object. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to remove the new lines. I'm going to encode it, copy that over, replace the message, send it, and voila. All of a sudden, I'm seeing actual usernames. I'm seeing a list of names, first and last names. Now, when I saw this, I'm like, uh-oh, that's not cool. Look, here's my name. Here I am, Andrew Davis. So when I saw this, I'm like, oh no, is our site vulnerable? What I'm actually seeing here is because of these communities page. Because we're on communities, if you come into the community, you'll see this is a chatter discussion group. And on the chatter discussion group, we have chosen to make visible, publicly visible first and last names, not different from, Twitter, Reddit, from lots of other social sites where you'll see people's full names stack overflow and so forth. But because we have these names of people publicly visible on the site, you can get them all out of the API. And so this is where but you notice my email is not visible, postcode, social security number, none of these things are actually visible. So this site is actually considered secure, but that's the idea, that you can begin to see that this is how it's actually done. So what I want to do is, having gone into that, I just wanted to talk about what you can do today. So I mentioned, and I'm getting towards the end, so I want to make sure that we have time for some questions. So I mentioned that Aaron Costello had created this page on how to secure your site. So I'm gonna make sure that that is posted in the chat for everybody, so you can follow those instructions. Salesforce has also taken some steps, but this stuff is serious. There is, the US government has an agency called CISA, the Cybersecurity Infrastructure and Security Agency, and they've created what's called the KEV catalog, the known exploited vulnerability. And this is basically, if a vulnerability is known and known to be exploited, they keep this catalog. And this becomes very, very important for the security officers in a company because, well, it's understandable that maybe there's zero-day attacks we couldn't protect against, or, advanced persistent threats, attackers we couldn't know about with very advanced techniques. There's also a whole lot of known exploited vulnerabilities. And at the very least, our organizations need to be secure against those. Among many, many other reasons, the SEC just 1 month ago, December 18th, 2023, rolled out a new rule came into effect that says, if you are a publicly traded company, meaning under the jurisdiction of the SEC, which is a whole lot of companies in the world, if you determine that you have some data breach, you must inform the SEC within 4 days, because that could have a material effect on your company's value and so forth, material effect on investors, and could be considered security fraud. One of the first actual criminal cases was levied against a CISO, an information security officer, related to the SolarWinds attack not long ago. So the stakes are starting to go up for companies about security. So when we think about what we can do to protect ourselves, we need clear communication of best practices. Your team needs training of all the members on the development team. You need to have policies, and you might even want to set aside special times during the year where you just go back and review, like a deep, spring cleaning, right? A deep dive into your security settings. What can you tighten up? What might be too restrictive? Can you get penetration testing? You can actually hire external companies to do penetration testing analysis. Make sure that they are Salesforce experts. Otherwise, you probably may not know how to attack a Salesforce site, but review all of your permissions, monitor and scan for vulnerabilities, and find any tools you can that help to simplify the process. And you need to be doing this, approaching this in a very thoughtful way, in a careful way, to make sure that, you're not building faster than you can protect your infrastructure. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to pause now and just invite any questions that might have come up during this time. So, okay, let me just see. I'll give folks a minute if you want to put things in. Okay, so one of the questions is, how frequent are leaks like this? How frequent are leaks like this? One answer is, we don't know. We don't know, unless you've done a lot of reconnaissance, but probably pretty frequent. Again, I mentioned this example of how common is it to, when you do a deployment, not deploy enough permissions. That is very, very common, right? How common is it to deploy too many permissions? Pretty common. How many Experience Cloud sites are there out there? I don't know. I'm assuming at least 100,000, you know. Salesforce has, what, 200,000, 150,000 customers. Some of them have many, many community sites for different purposes. So certainly something you need to check. So another question, if we have a breach, what are the steps we need to take? So typically within your organization, there will be a CISO, a Chief Information Security Officer, or some equivalent, like a VP of Security, Information Security, CIO, something like that. You need to bring it to their attention as quickly as possible. Now, sometimes there is a tendency to want to not say anything. That is very, very problematic. It's very problematic. And so you need to resist that. You need to overcome that. You need to be as transparent as possible. And one of the most important aspects of this is a culture of blameless postmortems. We're dealing with very, very complex stuff. There's, your Salesforce orgs are changing all the time. You configured something securely and then somebody else opened something else up and you didn't realize they were going to do that, and they didn't realize you had already opened something up. Something gets connected, wired up, and you're leaking data. That's what we call complexity. It's a moving target. It's changing all the time. It is impossible for anybody to know in advance all of the eventualities, everything that might possibly happen. It's impossible to perfectly protect in advance. As soon as you discover that maybe there's an issue, you need to be transparent about it. Internally, you need to be transparent about it. Talk to the CISO, and then follow their guidance. Hopefully they have a lot of guidance. If you are not clear who that person is in the organization, that may be an issue itself. That if there's not a designated security specialist in your organization that you can go to from your Salesforce team, that's something you need to take up at the highest levels of the company. The CEO needs to make sure that such expertise is embedded in an organization that's an accountable person. They, in turn, if you know that something's being exploited already, you might need to talk to the FBI, or if there's been an actual breach where somebody else gets access to the information, that may require you contact the SEC. But all of that stuff is a bit out of scope here, but that's definitely something that the security professionals will be thinking about in the organization. Is there an easy button? Basically, I'm just paraphrasing this question. Is there an easy button? Is there a way to just secure things? Well, do look for any communities, Experience Cloud sites you have that are not currently being used, and retire them or delete them, just to make sure that that's one surface area that you're not opening up. That's one thing. Salesforce does have a growing number of security guides that give you advice on how to protect your site. I'm just trying to remember the name of one of those. So you can go to trust.salesforce.com. You can begin to learn some of those practices. There is an entire dedicated Salesforce security site. And so I will also send the link to that. Salesforce does have some tools that they will upsell you, like Shield and so forth, and Security Center. They're very, very expensive, and may or may not be the tool you need. But the one thing, if you're looking manually, you want to be looking at the guest user access, guest user profiles, one of the most important things. And you can find the community's visibility of that is under the all communities setting, under the builder, under settings, and then you go to general, and there's a profile named guest user profile. I'm gonna just share my screen here. You see this screen here. Navigate to all communities, builder settings, so forth. So that's some of it. See here. And so another question is, my company is really small. We're not using Salesforce a whole lot. Are we still at risk for something like this? I would say yes. I would say use built-in capabilities from Salesforce wherever possible, as opposed to adding your own customization, because your own customizations, they just add additional complexity that you'll need to make sure is secure. But that's one of the additional layers of attention you need to be giving as you are building configurations, making sure you're building it in a secure way. So that's anyway. So there's a lot more that can be said on this, and I'm actually pushing it in terms of the time here. So I'm going to wind up at this point. But if we didn't get to your question, we'll try to see if we can follow up after the webinar and discuss more. But in brief, I really want to thank everybody so much for your attention. I know we've gone into a lot of technical details here, but it's been a real pleasure to have a chance to think through this with you, and for me to have a chance to understand some of these tools a little bit better. And I wish you all the best running, maintaining, securing your Salesforce instance. And do remember the shared responsibility model. It's your responsibility. Thanks so much.